1947. Sapporo prison death row. Guards execute their standard visual sweep. They find Yoshie Shiratori's cell empty. The physical mass of the condemned man is gone. Nothing remains in the maximum security containment zone except a gaping, irregular hole in the wooden floorboards. Beside the perimeter of the hole sits a standard-issue ceramic soup bowl. The rim of the bowl is coated in dried human hemoglobin. For 2 consecutive months, a severely malnourished condemned man scraped through solid structural timber. He engineered a subterranean tunnel directly below the heavy leather boots of the armed personnel guarding him. The military veterans laughed at the broken prisoner. They documented his lack of kinetic movement. They miscalculated his static energy. They did not know this was his 4th systemic breach. He had already humiliated the entire structural and tactical doctrine of the Japanese imperial prison system 3 separate times. He defeated multi-million-dollar maximum security infrastructure utilizing discarded bath wire, human saliva, fermented miso soup, and a chipped ceramic bowl. Then, after generating empirical proof that no engineered cage on Earth could contain his biological form, he initiated a sequence that defied all operational logic. He surrendered to a random municipal beat cop. He traded his ultimate physical freedom for the brief chemical release of 1 American cigarette. To deconstruct this extreme psychological paradox, we must first reverse engineer the precise mechanical anatomy of his initial breaches. June 15, 1936. Aomori Prison. Shiratori extracts a single continuous strand of copper wire from the structural binding of a wooden bath bucket. The wire measures exactly 0.08 inches in diameter. He slides the copper filament into the core of the cell lock. The mechanical cylinder utilizes a standard pin tumbler system. He has mathematically calculated the exact shear line of the internal pins. He practiced the required rotational torque 200 times. He utilized the lock mechanism he carved entirely from a solid block of ration soap. He applies 0.4 pounds of rotational pressure. The internal steel pins align. The heavy deadbolt retracts. He is 29 years old. He is serving a life sentence for a rural murder. He maintains a statistical claim of absolute innocence. He calculates his survival variables. The probability of dying from systemic abuse inside the cage approaches 100%. The probability of execution during a perimeter breach is highly elevated but leaves a fractional margin of operational success. He chooses the mathematical probability of motion over static termination. He manipulates his environment to spoof the human sensory inputs of the guards. He arranges exactly 4 loose wooden floorboards beneath his standard-issue cotton blanket. He calibrates the angles to create the exact volumetric silhouette of a sleeping adult male. The optical illusion is optimized for the low lumen output of the pre-dawn lighting grid. It will successfully spoof the guards during their 5:05 a.m. visual verification sweep. Every subsequent minute of undetected absence expands his perimeter distance. Shiratori memorized the guards' tactical patrol schedule down to the exact second. He identified their operational blind spots. Officer Yamamoto requires exactly 47 seconds to walk the length of the North Corridor. Officer Sato exhibits a repetitive psychological flaw. He routinely skips the 3rd floor visual check when atmospheric precipitation occurs. At precisely 4:33 a.m., all 6 active guards converge in the tactical break room. They are distracted by a localized radio broadcast. The human component of the security grid is temporarily offline. The structural vulnerability exists 18 feet above the concrete floor. It is a ventilation skylight. The geometric opening measures exactly 2 feet by 2 feet. During the initial construction phase, the civilian maintenance contractors failed to sink the iron security bars deeply into the load-bearing wooden frame. Shiratori isolated this critical structural weakness during his mandatory labor shifts. His assignment was cleaning the upper rafters. The civilian foreman failed to observe Shiratori applying isolated kinetic pressure to test the weight capacity of the individual timber beams. Now, he initiates the vertical ascent. His bare fingers locate microscopic friction, holes where the poured concrete meets the wooden ceiling joists. His muscular system burns from lactic acid buildup. He endured 3 months of localized isometric training inside the spatial confinement of his cell. He executed strict pull-ups on the upper doorframe. He maintained static plank positions against the freezing exterior wall for extended durations. When he was a juvenile, his biological father forced him to hang suspended from commercial boat rigging for 10 minutes straight as a behavioral punishment. 2 decades later, That exact mechanical endurance protocol saves his life. He reaches the skylight. He applies maximum downward kinetic force against the compromised wood. The wooden frame splinters under the sudden pressure spike. He forces his upper torso through the narrow aperture. His rib cage forcefully scrapes against the jagged timber splinters. He emerges onto the exterior roof. The municipal grid of Aomori City sleeps below. The ambient light is minimal. There are no automated perimeter searchlights. The prison administration only authorized the installation of high-lumen spotlights after his successful extraction. He maneuvers to the edge of the roof. He initiates a free-fall drop of 20 vertical feet into the facility's agricultural sector. The kinetic impact sends extreme shockwaves through his skeletal structure. His ankle joints absorb the brutal physical deceleration. He limps toward a specific coordinate along the exterior perimeter fence. He utilizes a pre-cut breach hole. He compromised the integrity of the chain link during a supervised work detail 24 hours earlier. He steps outside the containment zone. He achieves exactly 72 hours of unauthorized freedom. Severe caloric deficit and the biological necessity of sustenance force him to breach a local hospital supply room. A municipal police officer physically intercepts him while he transfers rice balls into a canvas sack. The kinetic impact of the tackle fractures 2 of Shiratori's ribs. The Aomori breach is neutralized. The judicial system retaliates. Judge Watanabe legally adds 20 years to the original life sentence. The judge issues a public statement of absolute systemic arrogance. He declares that the architectural perfection of Akita Prison will permanently break Shiratori's psychological resistance. The judge fundamentally misunderstands physics. Akita's escape-proof design contains one fatal engineering flaw. It requires an entity who thinks like liquid water to isolate it. Water does not fight resistance. Water continuously probes for the lowest point of structural integrity. November 1941. Shiratori is transported to Akita Prison. His biological mass registers at 132 pounds. 6 months later, severe nutritional deprivation drops his total mass to 108 pounds. The heavy iron handcuffs remain permanently locked onto his wrists. The protocol is enforced 24 hours a day. The constant friction of the metal carves deep, permanent grooves directly into his dermal and muscular tissue. The guards mandate a strict sleeping posture. He must lie on his back with his arms permanently crossed over his chest. If he involuntarily rolls onto his side during REM sleep, the leverage of the iron cuffs physically dislocates his shoulder joints. The cell walls are constructed from solid, highly polished copper plates. The walls rise to a vertical height of 15 feet. The polished copper acts as a continuous mirror. It reflects his emaciated biological form from every geometric angle. There is 0 microscopic handholds. The surface friction coefficient approaches 0. The prison architect intensely studied the mechanical escape parameters of Harry Houdini. The design philosophy is absolute. If you eliminate physical friction, you completely eliminate the variable of upward mobility. Shiratori ignores the copper. He maps the ceiling infrastructure. He visually counts exactly 47 structural bolts. They are arranged in a specific constellation pattern. The primary ventilation skylight sits 13 feet above the floor plane. Heavy iron bars block the aperture. The bars are set directly into a wooden support frame. Shiratori observes the thermodynamic variables of the wood over a prolonged timeline. During the extreme humidity of the Japanese summer, the cellular structure of the wood absorbs atmospheric moisture and expands. During the sub-zero winter freezes, the internal moisture crystallizes and the wood aggressively contracts. Each complete thermal cycle degrades the structural integrity of the timber by a microscopic margin. He calculates the specific rate of decay. He requires exactly 180 thermal cycles to weaken the frame to the point of structural failure. That equates to 6 months of sequential time. He decides to artificially accelerate the localized degradation process. Every night, he initiates a joint manipulation protocol. He forces his skeletal hands to collapse inward. He violently strips the iron cuffs over his knuckles. The mechanical compression rips the dermal layer entirely off his thumbs. He presses his bare spine against one polished copper wall. He elevates his legs and presses his bare feet against the opposing copper plane. He initiates the vertical climb. The polished copper surface should mathematically negate all upward movement. However, the precise curvature of his spine generates just enough lateral pressure against the opposing walls to maintain static friction. He reaches the ventilation frame. He lacks mechanical tools. He utilizes biological fluids, human saliva and palm sweat. He spits repeatedly onto the specific wooden joints housing the iron screws. The targeted application of continuous moisture artificially accelerates the biological rotting process of the timber. He utilizes his hardened fingernails as primitive flathead screwdrivers. He mechanically loosens each individual iron screw by exactly 1/4 of a millimeter per week. The localized mechanical degradation is completely invisible to casual visual inspection. It is highly cumulative over a prolonged timeline. The tactical guards sit in the operational corridor below. They play cards. They discuss the ongoing geopolitical conflict of the war. They never adjust their visual scanning plane upward. The specific geometric angle of the skylight and the optical glare of the polished copper create a permanent localized blind spot. The security system assumes scaling polished copper is a physical impossibility. They rely on theoretical architectural assumptions instead of executing continuous visual verification protocols. June 14, 1942, a severe summer typhoon impacts the Akita prefecture. Sustained wind velocities exceed 70 miles per hour. Severe barometric pressure drops trigger localized structural vibrations. Low-frequency thunder shakes the concrete foundations of the cell block. At precisely 2015 a.m., perfectly synchronized between the acoustic strikes of the lightning, Shiratori initiates the kinetic breach. He applies maximum upward force against the biologically compromised wooden frame. The degraded timber completely fractures and tears free from the copper housing. The acoustic signature of splintering wood is masked entirely by the atmospheric acoustic interference of the storm. He forces his biological mass through the narrow aperture. The diameter of the ventilation shaft is mathematically incompatible with the dimensions of a standard adult human torso. He intentionally and forcefully dislocates his own shoulder joints. The spherical head of the humerus bone physically pops out of the glenoid socket. He pushes his skeletal frame upward. His ribcage compresses against the unforgiving iron bars. The mechanical compression continues until his localized oxygen intake drops to zero. He continues the upward trajectory through sheer mechanical force. He successfully breaches the exterior roof. The torrential rain instantly drops the core temperature of his exposed skin. He's completely naked. He discarded his prison uniform inside the cell. Any layer of fabric would have added critical millimeters to his total body mass, rendering the physical extraction impossible. The automated guard tower searchlight sweeps the roof sector. The high-intensity beam misses his thermal signature by exactly 3 feet. He initiates a blind drop from the exterior perimeter wall. His downward trajectory is mathematically flawed. He impacts the solid ground. The kinetic energy severely fractures his left ankle. He initiates bipedal locomotion. He runs 16 miles on a shattered bone. He leaves physical biometric traces of raw hemoglobin on the ground. The heavy localized rainfall dilutes and completely washes away the blood before the morning patrol can visually detect the evidence. He survives in the wild for 3 consecutive months. Agricultural workers eventually locate his unconscious biological form in a rural field. Severe bacterial infection from the untreated ankle fracture completely shuts down his immune system. The authorities capture him. They decide that standard containment is no longer a viable operational parameter. They engineer a transfer to a specialized facility expressly designed to slowly terminate his biological functions. They transport him to a Bashiri prison. It is geographically isolated on the extreme northern coast of Hokkaido. Ambient winter temperatures routinely drop to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. It is the specific geographic coordinate where the Japanese Empire sends undesirable biological units to be permanently erased from the system. The prison administration fails to understand a fundamental principle of structural metallurgy. Extreme sub-zero temperatures physically alter the molecular structure of metal. The metal becomes highly brittle. This specific vulnerability is exponentially magnified in the low-grade steel manufactured during wartime resource shortages. The transport train to Abashiri requires 6 days of continuous travel. He rides inside a reinforced steel cage originally engineered for transporting adult bears. 8 armed military guards rotate active shifts. They visually monitor his every micro-movement. Abashiri prison sits at the exact coordinate where the freezing sea of Okhotsk meets the hostile mountain wilderness. The geographical location weaponizes nature itself. The hostile environment is the primary containment mechanism. The exterior perimeter walls are constructed from 18 feet of solid Hokkaido granite. Elevated guard towers are positioned mathematically every 30 yards to create overlapping, inescapable fields of automatic weapons fire. The security grid deploys canines that are genetically selected and extensively trained to track human biological signatures through active blizzard conditions. Warden Yamashita introduces a new physical constraint to the interior cell. Every square inch of the interior concrete surface of Shiratori's containment zone is thickly coated in pure whale oil. The unique lipid structure of the organic oil prevents it from ever completely freezing, even at sub-zero temperatures. It permanently negates all surface friction. Scaling the vertical walls is mathematically and physically impossible. Winter officially arrives in October. Solid ice forms directly on the interior concrete. His respiratory condensation physically crystallizes in the freezing air. It falls to the floor like localized snow. The administration strictly denies him any thermal insulation or blankets. This is the standard operating procedure for extreme flight risks. His biological system begins aggressively consuming its own internal muscle mass just to generate baseline core heat. But the laws of thermodynamics operate in two distinct directions. Extreme cold removes vital heat from living human tissue. It also removes kinetic energy from solid metal. It causes severe structural contraction. The primary food slot in his reinforced iron door is a perfect geometric rectangle. It measures exactly 4 inches high by 12 inches wide. Under the sustained minus 30-degree temperatures, the iron frame physically shrinks. The aperture mathematically contracts by exactly 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters of spatial reduction is catastrophic for a normal human attempting a breach. Shiratori is not a normal human. He spends 6 continuous months systematically dislocating his own skeletal structure every single night. He thoroughly mapped the absolute physical limits of human cartilage and bone. He initiates the breach sequence. He deliberately fasts for 5 consecutive days. His internal stomach volume physically shrinks to a baseline minimum. His digestive tract completely empties. On November 3, 1944, the ambient temperature hits minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal contraction of the steel slot reaches its maximum mathematical limit. He introduces his cranium into the narrow slot. He targets his clavicles next. The localized pain threshold would instantly induce unconsciousness in a standard biological unit. He presses his collarbones inward and forcefully downward. The bones physically overlap behind his sternum. He forces his shoulder joints entirely out of their sockets. The extreme friction between his bare epidermis and the frozen steel forcefully strips the skin from his upper torso. He rotates his ribcage to an impossible angle. He forcefully expels all remaining oxygen from his lungs to marginally reduce his overall thoracic diameter. The spatial tolerance is exactly 0. He pushes forward. A major stabilizing ligament in his hip socket violently snaps. The acoustic signature mimics the sound of tearing heavy canvas. He successfully clears the aperture. His physical form drops heavily to the frozen corridor floor. He is a grotesque, asymmetrical collection of disjointed bones and ruptured muscle tissue. Systematically resetting his skeletal structure requires 4 distinct, agonizing attempts. Standard bipedal locomotion is utterly impossible. He physically drags his mass down the long, freezing hallway. He reaches the exterior perimeter fence. He deploys his only engineered tool. He painstakingly hoarded his daily liquid ration of miso soup. It is now frozen into a solid, dense block of high-sodium ice. He tightly clamps the frozen block between his bare palms. He applies rapid, continuous kinetic friction. The mechanical energy generates localized heat. The targeted thermal transfer slowly liquefies the suspension. He crawls directly to the heavy iron bolts securing the perimeter fence to the concrete foundation. He pours the highly concentrated liquid sodium mixture directly onto the sub-zero iron hardware. The sudden, extreme localized temperature differential triggers instantaneous thermal shock. The molecular bonds of the freezing iron violently shatter. The primary bolt cracks under its own internal stress. He manually breaches the compromised fence. He crawls out into the hostile Hokkaido wilderness. He leaves a highly visible trail of raw, red hemoglobin in the pure white snow. The seasoned military guards assume a bleeding man cannot survive the thermal drop. They ignore the biometric data. Municipal police locate his biological signature exactly 6 months later. He is surviving deep inside an abandoned industrial mine shaft. The Tokyo District Court permanently sentences him to death by hanging. The year is 1947. The Japanese Empire has fallen. The structural integrity of the entire Japanese prison system is severely compromised by massive post-war budget deficits. Sapporo prison houses the active death row inmates. The specific facility utilizes wooden floorboards suspended directly over raw earth, a cost-saving architectural flaw. The guards are all military combat veterans suffering from severe, untreated psychological trauma. They execute their visual checks based on rigid, highly predictable military chronometry. They constantly scan the horizontal and vertical planes of the cells. They never scan the subsurface plane. No documented prisoner has ever successfully breached the Z-axis downward. Shiratori possesses exactly one physical item, a standard-issue ceramic soup bowl. The rim is slightly chipped. The ceramic material is categorically not sharp enough to sever human tissue. However, it is dense enough to generate severe, continuous friction against degraded wood. He initiates a meticulous 2-month excavation protocol. He systematically grinds the ceramic chip against the wooden floorboards. The constant friction creates a microscopic groove. The groove slowly expands into a massive structural failure. He breaches the floor. Subterranean excavation is pure geometry and fluid dynamics. The human body automatically generates approximately 2 cups of liquid waste every 24 hours. He utilizes his own urine to chemically alter the local soil density. The moisture rapidly softens the highly compacted dirt. Soft earth is mathematically easier to extract and compress. He systematically hides the displaced soil inside his standard sleeping mat. The volumetric increase of the mat is distributed perfectly evenly. The guards visually register the slight anomaly as hoarded food rations. They manually search for organic contraband. They detect nothing. The tunnel slowly advances at a maximum velocity of 1 foot per week. The subterranean dirt walls require immediate structural reinforcement to prevent a catastrophic localized collapse. Shiratori manufactures a primitive composite building material. He mechanically mixes his own solid biological waste with dry straw extracted from his bedding. He thoroughly coats the interior tunnel walls. The mixture chemically dries into a rigid, highly load-bearing shell. The olfactory signature of the feces is extreme. The guards logically misidentify the severe odor as a systemic failure of the death row plumbing infrastructure. After 3 continuous months of excavation, the horizontal trajectory successfully clears the heavy exterior concrete wall. He encounters a severe geological barrier, the localized water table. The tunnel rapidly floods with groundwater. Downward progress permanently halts. He instantly recalculates the subterranean geometry. He precisely angles the trajectory upward at exactly 40 degrees. This specific mathematical angle perfectly bypasses the subterranean water pressure zone. On March 31, 1947, he successfully breaches the surface. He emerges directly inside the prison's agricultural sector. He is completely coated in a thick layer of freezing mud and raw human waste. The automated guard tower searchlight is completely offline. It requires replacement mechanical parts from a decimated Tokyo industrial sector. He calmly walks through the unsecured main perimeter gate. He achieves total operational freedom for exactly 1 human year. The greatest physical anomaly in Japanese penal history simply vanishes from the grid. He systematically bypasses all municipal facial recognition protocols. He operates flawlessly under synthetic identities. Then, the mechanical perfection of his evasion encounters a microscopic, highly irrational psychological variable. May 5, 1948. Maruyama Park. A local patrol officer approaches a vagrant sitting alone on a municipal bench. The officer does not deploy his service weapon. He deploys a single American cigarette. It is a highly valuable, heavily rationed commodity in occupied Japan. He physically offers it to the vagrant. The thermal transfer of burning tobacco. A singular, highly illogical act of uncalculated human empathy. The vagrant deeply inhales the chemical smoke. He looks directly at the armed officer. He calmly states his true identity. Yoshie Shiratori, the man who shattered solid iron with soup and dissolved structural copper with human spit. He voluntarily extends his wrists for the standard iron cuffs. The system spent millions of dollars engineering impenetrable fortresses of reinforced steel, solid granite, and lethal ice. They deployed hundreds of armed personnel and engineered tracking hounds. Every mechanical, architectural, and tactical barrier completely failed to contain his biological form. The ultimate vulnerability of the system was never physical. It was entirely psychological. A multi-billion-dollar containment grid was completely neutralized by a 2-inch cylinder of dried tobacco and a microscopic unit of basic human dignity. The machine could not break him. A single cigarette did. If you want to witness another impossible mechanical breach, where 10 starving prisoners orchestrate the ultimate tactical anomaly and physically steal a 14-ton experimental Nazi bomber to escape a high-security death camp, you know exactly where to look. We will deconstruct that flight next on Prison Break Stories.